The scent of freshly cut grass and impending rain hung heavy in the Oakhaven air. It was the smell I'd dreamed of, a fragrant promise of the quiet life I'd fought so hard to secure for my son, Leo, and me. After years suffocating in the city's concrete canyons, navigating a world of brutalist courtrooms and the acidic tang of human misery, this little slice of suburban paradise felt like coming up for air. Our new house, a modest but sturdy two-story colonial with hopeful blue shutters, was our fortress of solitude. The moving truck had pulled away just that morning, leaving behind a chaotic symphony of cardboard boxes and the thrilling, terrifying emptiness of a new beginning. Leo, at 16, was already claiming his territory, his headphones a permanent fixture as he unpacked his universe of books and graphic novels. I watched him from the kitchen window, a pang of love so sharp it almost hurt. He had his father's thoughtful eyes and quiet disposition. Protecting his peace was the entire point of this move, of everything. I'd left a high-stakes, high-stress career, a corner office with a skyline view, and a reputation that preceded me, all to give him a normal life. A life where the loudest noise was a lawnmower, and the biggest drama was who brought what to the annual block party. I was wiping down the granite countertops, humming along to some forgotten classic rock station, when a shadow fell across the front door's glass inlay. I turned, expecting a delivery driver, or perhaps a friendly neighbor. Instead, I found a woman who seemed to be constructed entirely of sharp angles and disapproval. She was stick-thin, dressed in crisp khaki shorts and a blindingly white polo shirt, with a small, embroidered crest over the heart, a stylized oak tree. Her salt and pepper hair was cut into a severe, helmet-like bob. She held a wicker basket in one hand and a clipboard in the other, and the clipboard seemed to be her primary focus. I opened the door, manufacturing a warm smile. "Hello, I'm Sarah Jensen. We just moved in." She didn't return the smile. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, did a swift, forensic scan of my entryway, lingering on a stack of boxes. "Carol Donaldson. I'm the president of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association." She said president, with the same gravity a four-star general might use to announce their rank. She thrust the wicker basket at me. It wasn't filled with cookies or wine, but with a thick, binder-clipped stack of papers. "Welcome packet. This contains the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs. You should have received a copy during your closing, but we find it's best to provide a fresh one. Ignorance is not an excuse." "Oh," I said, taking the heavy bundle. "Right. Thank you. I'll be sure to read through it." "See that you do," she clipped, her gaze shifting past me, out to the small patch of lawn I now owned. Her lips pursed into a thin, bloodless line. "You have a violation." I blinked. "I'm sorry, we haven't even unpacked yet." Section 4, subsection C, paragraph 12. She recited, as if from scripture. "Lawn and garden ornaments. All decorative items must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Prohibited items include, but are not limited to, plastic flamingos, reflective gazing balls, and anthropomorphic statuary." She pointed a bony finger toward the edge of my freshly laid sod. My eyes followed her finger to a small, cheerful garden gnome. It had been a gag gift from my late husband years ago. A silly little thing with a pointy red hat and a fishing pole. Leo had insisted on placing it by the mailbox the moment we arrived. A small act of claiming our new space. "The gnome," she stated, the words dripping with contempt. "It's anthropomorphic statuary. It needs to be removed. Immediately." I felt a bubble of incredulous laughter rise in my chest, but I suppressed it. This was my new start. Be nice. Be compliant. Be neighborly. Of course. I'm so sorry. I hadn't even gotten to that page yet. We'll take it inside right away. Good, she said, making a sharp, decisive tick on her clipboard. You'll receive a written warning in the mail as a formality. But since you're complying now, we can forego the initial fine. Consider it a professional courtesy. She gave me another once-over, her eyes cataloging my paint-splattered jeans and old college sweatshirt. Oak Haven prides itself on maintaining a certain standard. Mrs. Jensen. A standard of aesthetic uniformity and community discipline. We all have to do our part. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel, her posture ramrod straight, and marched down the driveway. The clipboard held firmly at her side. I stood in the doorway, the heavy rule book in my hands, a faint, metallic taste of dread in my mouth. The scent of fresh-cut grass suddenly seemed less like a promise and more like a threat. My dream of peace and quiet was already being scrutinized, measured, and found wanting by a woman with a clipboard and a vendetta against a 2-foot-tall ceramic fisherman. The fortress of solitude, it seemed, came with a warden. The first official notice arrived 3 days later, tucked neatly into our brand-new HOA-approved mailbox. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, bearing the same stylized oak tree logo from Carol's polo shirt. The formality of it was almost comical. Violation notice. It declared in a severe, all-caps font. It referenced Bylaw Section 4C12 regarding the unapproved anthropomorphic statuary, and noted that the violation had been cured by my prompt removal of the offending item. It was signed, in a sharp, aggressive script, Carol Donaldson, President, Oak Haven HOA. Even though we'd complied, the letter felt less like a resolved issue and more like the first shot in a war I didn't know I was fighting. I tucked it away, determined to be the model resident. My life had been defined by conflict for too long. Here, in Oak Haven, I would be a pacifist. My commitment to pacifism was tested a week later. I'd spent a small fortune and a full weekend planting a flower bed along the front of the house. I chose knockout roses, a vibrant, defiant red. They were my late husband's favorite, and planting them felt like putting down roots, both literally and figuratively. They were a splash of life against the house's quiet blue. The work was hard. My muscles ached. But as I looked at the finished bed, I felt a sense of profound accomplishment. 2 weeks after that, another cream-colored envelope appeared. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an invoice. $50 fine, violation of landscaping guidelines. Section 5A2. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the attached explanation. Color palette infraction. The introduction of flora with a color value deemed overly vibrant. Hex code. FFGZ or similar without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee constitutes a breach of community aesthetic standards. They were fining me for the color of my roses. I stared at the letter, a cold fury beginning to smolder in the pit of my stomach. My old instincts, the ones I'd tried so hard to pack away with my legal briefs and pinstripe suits, began to stir. I pulled out the massive binder of CC&Rs Carol had bestowed upon me and flipped to Section 5. The language was deliberately vague, filled with subjective terms like harmonious, understated, and in keeping with the traditional neighborhood character. There was no mention of specific hex codes. It was a classic case of selective, arbitrary enforcement. It was designed to be a weapon, not a guideline. I could fight it. I could draft a response that would pick apart the unenforceability of the clause, cite the lack of specific prohibitions, and demand a hearing. My fingers actually twitched with the desire to do it. But then, I looked out the window at Leo, who was sketching in a notebook on the front porch, our goofy golden retriever, Buster, asleep at his feet. This was for him. This was for peace. Swallowing my pride, I wrote the check. I mailed it the same day. I would not give Carol the fight she so clearly craved. The following Monday, I found a second fine in the mailbox. 75. Improper waste receptacle placement, Section 7.B4. The bylaw stated that trash and recycling bins could not be visible from the street, except on the designated day of collection, between the hours of 5 Sunrasud a.m. and 8 Sunrasud p.m. I had taken the bins out on Sunday night at 10 Sunrasud p.m. It was a 15-hour infraction. I checked the postmark on the envelope. It had been mailed Saturday. She must have written the ticket the moment she saw the bins, and then waited for the post office to open. The dedication to pettiness was almost impressive. Again, I paid it. I set a recurring alarm on my phone. Trash cans out. Monday 5:01 a.m. I was determined to starve this beast of a woman by giving her nothing to feed on. I reread the CC&Rs from cover to cover, highlighting every absurd rule. No political signs. No basketball hoops left out overnight. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for a 3-week period, the exact dates of which were dictated by the HOA board annually. The grass could be no shorter than 2 inches and no taller than 4. It was a parody of order, a suburban dystopia governed by the whims of Carol Donaldson. I made a point of being impeccably compliant. My lawn was a perfect 3 inches. My trash cans were invisible. My car was always parked squarely in the driveway, never touching the street. I even submitted a formal application to the Architectural Review Committee chaired, of course, by Carol to keep my red roses. The application was denied, citing their jarring effect on the neighborhood's serene visual landscape. So, with a heavy heart, I dug them up and replaced them with board-approved pale pink camellias. Each act of compliance felt like swallowing a small shard of glass. I thought, naively, that my perfect obedience would end the harassment. But I was beginning to understand that for someone like Carol, the rules were not the point. My compliance wasn't a victory for her. It was a denial of the conflict she needed to feel powerful. If I wouldn't break the rules, she would simply have to break something of mine. The quiet war of letters and fines escalated into something more insidious on a Tuesday morning in early July. I walked out to get the paper, coffee in hand, and was greeted by a chemical stench that scraped the back of my throat. I looked down at the flower bed where the inoffensive, board-approved pink camellias had been thriving. They were no longer thriving. A wide, ugly swath of them, right in the center of the bed, had turned a sickly, wilted brown. The leaves were curled and blackened at the edges, and the ground around them was dark and damp. Despite the lack of rain, it was herbicide, a powerful, commercial-grade weed killer, dumped with malicious precision. It wasn't an overspray from a neighbor's lawn care. The line of destruction was too sharp, too deliberate. The acrid smell was proof. My first reaction wasn't anger, but a cold, clinical calm. The old part of my brain, the prosecutor, took over before the homeowner could even process the violation. I went back inside, pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves from under the sink, and grabbed a handful of small Ziploc bags and a garden trowel. Back outside, I carefully collected soil samples from the affected area and, for control, from an untouched part of the bed. I took dozens of photos with my phone, documenting the scene from every angle, capturing the clear line where the poison had been poured. I noted the time, the weather conditions, the lingering chemical odor. I was collecting evidence, chain of custody, documentation, control samples. The procedural dance was so ingrained in me, it was like breathing. For a moment, I let myself think about what I could do with this. I could send the samples to a lab for analysis. I could check the security cameras of the neighbors at the end of the cul-de-sac. I could file a police report for vandalism and destruction of property. A part of me, the part that had spent 15 years building cases brick by painstaking brick, yearned to do just that. To catch her, to expose her, to see her brittle facade crack under the weight of actual, real-world consequences. Then I looked up and down the quiet street. Mrs. Gable from 3 doors down was watering her petunias. Mr. Henderson was backing his pristine sedan out of his driveway. This was Oakhaven. People didn't get soil samples analyzed here. They didn't think in terms of evidence and prosecution. They borrowed cups of sugar and waved as they got their mail. A police report would brand me as the neighborhood eccentric, the troublemaker, the one who couldn't handle a simple dispute. Carol, I was sure, would paint it as a desperate act of retaliation for her diligent enforcement of the bylaws. She would be the victim, the benevolent dictator, just trying to maintain order in the face of my chaos. The conflict was asymmetrical. I was bound by a desire for normalcy and peace, while she was bound by nothing but her own petty thirst for power. She could operate in the shadows, with deniable acts of aggression, while any response from me would have to be public and would immediately shatter the very peace I had moved here to find. I spent the afternoon digging up the dead camellias, the poisoned soil burning my nostrils even through a mask. I disposed of it all in heavy-duty contractor bags. The hole in my flower bed looked like a fresh grave. As I worked, my mind drifted to a case from years ago, a business dispute, where one partner kept sabotaging the other's equipment in small, untraceable ways. The victim had no proof, just a string of costly accidents. He'd come to my office, looking defeated, saying, "How do you fight a ghost?" That's what Carol was, a ghost who haunted my property lines, armed with bylaws and weed killer. Fighting her with the tools of my old life felt like using a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito. It would be effective, yes, but the collateral damage to my new life would be immense. That evening, I called my old chief investigator, a gruff, brilliant man named Frank. We had put away dozens of criminals together. "Hey, Frank," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Hypothetical for you. Vandalism case. Repeat incidents. Small scale. No witnesses. Perpetrator is known to the victim, but there's no hard proof connecting them. What's the play?" Frank grunted on the other end of the line. "Sounds like a pain in the ass. Sarah, you got a problem with your new neighbors." "Just a hypothetical, Frank, a thought exercise." "Uh-huh," he said, unconvinced. "Well, without a confession or a camera catching them in the act, you've got squat. You can set up your own surveillance, but that can get messy. Best bet the perp escalates. They always do. They get sloppy. They get arrogant. You just have to be patient and wait for them to hand you the rope." Patience. It wasn't my strongest virtue. I had spent my career forcing issues, driving action, bringing things to a head. But Frank was right. Carol was arrogant. She believed she was untouchable in her little kingdom. All I could do was wait, document everything, and let her believe she was winning. I just hoped that when she finally handed me the rope, I wouldn't have already lost everything I was trying to protect. I replanted the flower bed the next day with hardy, uninspired green shrubs. They were bland, colorless, and utterly compliant. I hated them on sight. The move from physical, deniable attacks to social warfare was swift and brutally effective. Carol, having failed to break my spirit with fines or my flower beds with poison, decided to poison the well of public opinion instead. Her chosen venue was the Oakhaven Neighbors private Facebook group, a digital town square I had joined with optimistic visions of BBQ invitations and recommendations for local plumbers. Instead, it became Carol's personal burn book. The first post was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It appeared a few days after the herbicide incident. It was a gentle reminder to the community. Hello, neighbors. It began with a cheerful sunflower emoji. Just a friendly reminder about Oakhaven's community standards. We're so lucky to live in a place where everyone takes pride in their homes and respects the shared aesthetic that keeps our property values high. It's important that we all remain diligent in adhering to the CC&Rs we all agreed to when we moved here. Sometimes, new residents who aren't used to such high standards can find the rules a bit challenging. Let's all offer them a helping hand and guide them toward the Oakhaven way. A beautiful community doesn't happen by accident. Oakhaven pride. Community first. There was no mention of my name, my address, or the color of my dead roses. There didn't need to be. Every resident who had seen the string of violation notices on the HOA community board or noticed my frantic landscaping changes knew exactly who she was talking about. The comments started rolling in. Well said. Carol standards are what make Oakhaven great, from a woman named Brenda, whose lawn was an almost artificial shade of green. So true. A few bad apples can spoil the whole bunch. Thanks for staying on top of things. From a man I recognized as one of Carol's regular golf cart passengers. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up my neck. I was being publicly admonished, painted as a defiant, slovenly newcomer who was single-handedly dragging down the neighborhood. My attempts at quiet compliance were being twisted into a narrative of rebellion. The digital attacks grew more specific. A week later, a new post appeared. Public service announcement. Please be mindful of your pets. Folks, even dogs that seem friendly can be unpredictable. It's crucial for the safety of our children that all pets are properly restrained and don't display aggressive behaviors. A loose or barking dog can turn a peaceful afternoon into a tragedy. Better to be safe than sorry. This was aimed at Buster, my sweet, dopey 80-pound golden retriever, whose only crimes were shedding prodigiously and believing every human was put on this earth to scratch his ears. He barked occasionally, as dogs do, usually at a squirrel who had the audacity to run along our fence. But he was never loose, never aggressive. Yet, the implication was clear. My dog was a menace. The real-world effects were immediate and chilling. My friendly waves to neighbors were met with hesitant, tight-lipped smiles, or, more often, a sudden fascination with their shoes. Conversations at the community mailbox, once pleasant and welcoming, became brief and stilted. When I took Buster for his evening walk, mothers would pull their children a little closer, or people would cross the street to avoid us. I was being systematically isolated, turned into a pariah in my own sanctuary. The worst part was the impact on Leo. He was a quiet kid, and making new friends at a new school was already a monumental challenge. He'd struck up a tentative friendship with a boy down the street, and they had been making plans to see a movie. Then, one afternoon, the boy's mother called. She was polite but firm. "I'm so sorry," she'd said, "but I don't think it's a good idea for Jacob to come over. We're just being a bit cautious right now." When I hung up the phone, I saw Leo standing in the hallway. He'd heard. The look on his face a mixture of confusion, hurt, and resignation was like a physical blow. He didn't ask why. He just retreated to his room. the soft click of his door closing behind him, echoing the sound of my heart breaking. Carol wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was attacking my son. She had crossed a line. My instinct, my training, my entire being screamed for retaliation. I scrolled through her posts, my legal mind dissecting every word. Slander per se, defamation by innuendo, libel. I could draft a cease and desist letter so sharp it would give her paper cuts. I could file a civil suit that would bury her in depositions and discovery requests for the next 5 years. I had the knowledge, the skill, and the resources to make her life a living hell within the perfectly legal, professionally devastating confines of the law. I even typed out the first few paragraphs of the letter, the words flowing from my fingertips with righteous fury. It has come to my attention that you, Ms. Carol Donaldson, have engaged in a pattern of targeted harassment and defamation, creating a hostile living environment and causing material harm to my family's reputation and social standing. But then I stopped. I looked around the quiet house, at the unpacked boxes that still lingered in the corners, symbols of our unfinished new life. A lawsuit would be a bomb. It would make everything public, everything ugly. The story would be, angry lawyer sues HOA president over Facebook posts. I would win, eventually. But in the process, Oakhaven would become a battlefield, not a home. Leo would be the kid whose mom sued the neighborhood. My peace would be irrevocably shattered, replaced by the very conflict I had fled. I deleted the draft. I closed the laptop. My strategy of passive compliance had failed. A direct legal assault felt like a Pyrrhic victory at best. I was in a strategic no man's land, and Carol was still lobbing mortars into my life with impunity. Frank's words echoed in my head. They get sloppy. They get arrogant. She was getting more arrogant with every post, with every neighbor who crossed the street to avoid me. She was building her own pyre, stick by stick. All I could do was wait for her to light the match. But waiting, I was discovering, was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Having successfully ostracized us, Carol's next move was to legitimize her campaign of harassment by enlisting official city channels. She was no longer content to be the queen of Oakhaven. She wanted the validation of outside authorities, to prove that my alleged transgressions were not just offensive to her, but a genuine threat to public order. She decided to weaponize the very systems I had once been a part of. It started with a visit from a city code enforcement officer. He was a young man, looking barely out of his 20s, with a clipboard that seemed to pale in comparison to Carol's. He had a weary, apologetic air about him. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous complaint about the height of your lawn," he said, avoiding my eyes. I gestured to the lawn, which I had personally mowed 2 days prior to a perfect HOA-approved 3-inch height. As you can see, it's well within regulation. He knelt, produced a small ruler, and dutifully measured a few blades. "Yep, looks good," he sighed, standing up. "Sorry to bother you. We just have to follow up on every complaint." "I understand," I said, offering him a cool bottle of water, which he gratefully accepted. "Do these anonymous complaints happen often?" He took a long drink before answering. "From this address," he said, jerking a thumb in the general direction of Carol's house. "Let's just say we have a frequent filer program. You have a good day, ma'am." A week later, it was a truck from the city's water department. An anonymous tip had suggested I had an unpermitted sprinkler system tapping into the main line. 2 friendly but resigned city workers spent an hour inspecting my plumbing and water meter before declaring it, to no one's surprise, perfectly normal. "You wouldn't believe the calls we get," one of them confided in me as they left. Each visit was a minor disruption, a small paper cut. They were designed to vex and intimidate, to create a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Carol was trying to swamp me with bureaucracy, to make me feel like I was under siege not just by her, but by the entire municipal government. The irony was thick enough to choke on. For years, I had been the one dispatching investigators, signing off on search warrants, and coordinating with city agencies. Now, those same agencies were being sent to my home on farcical errands, and I had to play the part of the slightly bewildered, perfectly cooperative citizen. The culmination of this strategy, however, was far more serious. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, trying to master a new pasta recipe, and Leo was in the backyard, throwing a slobbery tennis ball for Buster. The sound of Buster's joyous, booming barks was the soundtrack to our quiet life. Then, through the open window, I heard a different sound, a sharp, authoritative voice. "Ma'am, I need you to secure that animal immediately." My blood ran cold. I rushed to the back door and saw two uniformed animal control officers standing just outside my back gate. One was a stern-looking woman with her hand resting near a catchpole on her belt. The other was a younger man holding a tablet. Carol was standing on the sidewalk behind them, arms crossed, watching with an expression of grim satisfaction. "There's a problem, officers," I asked, my voice preternaturally calm as I clipped Buster's leash to his collar. "We received a report of a vicious and uncontrolled animal at this address, ma'am," the lead officer said. The complainant stated the dog was charging the fence, behaving aggressively toward pedestrians. I looked at Buster, who was now sitting placidly at my feet, tail thumping a steady, friendly rhythm against the patio stones, his tongue lolling out in a goofy grin. He looked about as vicious as a throw pillow. "This is Buster," I said, my voice level. "He is a 4-year-old neutered male golden retriever. He is never in the yard unsupervised, and, as you can see, he is not aggressive." The report mentioned lunging and snarling, the officer insisted, reading from the tablet. This was the moment where my old life and new life collided. I could feel the switch flip in my brain. The friendly, unassuming suburban mom receded, and the district attorney stepped forward. "Officers," I began, my tone shifting from conversational to evidentiary, "I can assure you, Buster has no history of aggression. In fact, he's a graduate of the Oakwood Canine Good Citizen program. I have his certificate, as well as his complete veterinary records and city license. Just inside if you'd like to see them." They exchanged a surprised look. Most people got defensive or hysterical. They did not offer documentation. I continued, my gaze flicking to Carol, who was now looking slightly less smug. "Furthermore, my property is equipped with a high-definition security system. This was a bluff, but a calculated one. It records all activity in the backyard. I would be more than happy to download the footage from the last hour for your review. It will clearly show my son playing fetch with our dog, and I'm confident it will not show any of the behavior described in this complaint." I paused, letting the implications sink in. Of course, filing a false report with a city agency is a misdemeanor offense. I'm sure you'll include that fact in your official write-up. The lead officer's posture changed. She was no longer dealing with a hysterical pet owner. She was dealing with someone who knew the system, someone who spoke the language of liability and evidence. Her eyes narrowed, not at me, but in the direction of the sidewalk. "That won't be necessary, ma'am," she said, her voice now clipped and professional. She turned to her partner. Mark it as unfounded. Animal is secure. Shows no signs of aggression. She then looked directly at Carol. We take false reports very seriously. They waste city resources and divert us from real emergencies. Continued abuse of the system will have consequences. Carol's face, a mask of triumphant righteousness only moments before, crumpled into a mottled canvas of fury and disbelief. She sputtered. But he was. I saw him. The officer just gave her a flat, unimpressed stare before turning back to me. Have a good day, ma'am. Nice-looking dog. They walked back to their truck, leaving Carol standing alone on the sidewalk, exposed and impotent. She shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The venom in it was palpable. I had not only defeated her, but I had used the very weapon she'd chosen the authority of the city against her. I had embarrassed her, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this would not be the end. She had been publicly humiliated. Her next move wouldn't be about bylaws or authorities. It would be personal. The air in Oakhaven grew thick with a tension that only I seemed to feel. After the public failure of the animal control gambit, Carol retreated. The posts on the neighborhood Facebook group ceased. The cream-colored envelopes no longer appeared in my mailbox. The silence was more unnerving than the constant barrage of petty attacks. It was the quiet before a storm, the unnerving stillness of a predator gathering itself to strike. I saw her sometimes. A fleeting glimpse of her golf cart zipping around a corner, or her silhouette in her window, watching, always watching. My carefully constructed peace was a ruin. I felt like a soldier in a trench, waiting for an attack I knew was coming, but couldn't predict. I found myself double-checking the locks at night, my ears straining at every creak of the house. I instructed Leo to text me the moment he got home from school, a new rule that made him roll his eyes, but which I insisted upon with a seriousness that brooked no argument. I was living in a state of high alert, the very condition I had moved here to escape. The direct threat, when it came, was almost anticlimactic in its setting, yet chilling in its delivery. I was retrieving the mail, a pointless act of optimism, as it never contained anything good anymore. Carol's garage door was open, and she was standing inside, ostensibly sorting recycling. As I walked back up my driveway, she stepped out to the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, blocking my path. It was the first time we'd been face to face since the incident with the officers. Mrs. Jensen, she said, her voice stripped of its usual condescending civility. It was flat, cold, and hard as granite. Carol, I replied, my own voice equally devoid of warmth. I clutched my junk mail like a shield. You think you're very clever, don't you? She hissed, taking a step closer. The country club polo and khaki shorts couldn't soften the menace radiating from her. Coming into our community, ignoring the rules, turning our own city services against us. You think you've won. I don't think in terms of winning and losing. Carol, I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I just want to be left alone. She let out a short, ugly laugh. Oh, you'll be left alone. People who don't fit in here, who cause trouble, they find it's better to just leave. Sometimes things happen that help them make that decision. Her eyes, those faded denim chips of glass, narrowed. She looked past me, her gaze fixing on my front door, where Leo had just walked out to see what the holdup was. He gave a small, hesitant wave. Carol's eyes locked on him, and a cruel, knowing smile touched her lips. It's a nice community for families, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. a conspiratorial and deeply threatening tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up. A safe community. It would be a real shame if it stopped being safe. Especially for a boy like yours. Walking home from school, riding his bike. Accidents happen. It's a dangerous world for a teenager when his mother makes enemies. Ice flooded my veins. This was it. The final line, crossed without a flicker of hesitation. She wasn't threatening my lawn anymore, or my reputation. She was threatening my son. My entire world contracted down to that single, terrifying point. The carefully constructed dam of my patience, my strategy of waiting, of absorbing her attacks, crumbled into dust. The prosecutor, the protector, the mother lioness roared to life inside me, and all it could see was red. My voice, when I finally found it, was unrecognizable. It was a low, dangerous growl that I hadn't used since I'd cross-examined a remorseless killer on the witness stand. Let me be perfectly clear. Carol, I said, taking a step toward her, forcing her to take an involuntary step back. If you ever mention my son again, if you so much as look at him again, you will discover that I am capable of making your life a degree of miserable you cannot possibly imagine. This is your one and only warning. Her eyes widened in surprise at my sudden transformation, but her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Is that a threat, Mrs. Jensen? She sneered. No, I said, my voice dropping even lower, imbued with the absolute certainty of 15 years spent in the belly of the legal beast. It is a statement of fact, a promise. Now get off my property. I turned and walked back to my house without looking back, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it felt like it could power a city. I pulled Leo inside, the look of concern on his face a stark reminder of what was at stake. The war was no longer cold. Carol had threatened my child. She had finally handed me the rope, and I was going to let her walk right into the noose. From that moment on, I stopped being a resident, trying to fit in. I went back to work. I reactivated the part of my brain that saw threats, analyzed weaknesses, and prepared for battle. I was no longer waiting for her to escalate. I was preparing for it. The final, spectacular escalation happened on a crisp Friday afternoon 2 weeks later. The silence had been absolute, and I knew it was the harbinger of her endgame. I was working from home, a luxury of my new, quieter life. When my phone buzzed with a call from Leo, I answered with a cheerful, "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" His voice was a choked, terrified whisper. Mom, you have to come. There are these men. They stopped me. Every nerve ending in my body went supernova. Where are you? Leo, talk to me. Are you hurt? I'm at the park entrance. At the end of our street, he stammered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I was just walking home from the library. This golf cart, it blocked the sidewalk. It has flashing lights on it. 2 men got out. They're wearing uniforms. They said they're with HOA security. They said I was loitering. HOA security. The phrase was a joke. Oakhaven didn't have a security force. It was Carol. This was her move. And they're arresting me. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. They have handcuffs. The world tilted on its axis. Leo, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice a blade of pure, cold steel. I was already grabbing my car keys. My purse. Do not resist. Do not say anything other than your name. Tell them you will not answer any questions until your mother, an attorney, is present. I am on my way. I am 5 minutes away. I slammed the front door behind me and sprinted to my car, my mind a maelstrom of legal statutes and murderous rage. Impersonating a peace officer, a felony. Unlawful restraint, a felony. Kidnapping, a Class A felony. She had gone from petty tyrant to a criminal conspirator. She had put her hands on my son. I screeched around the corner onto my street and saw it. The scene was a grotesque parody of law enforcement. A modified golf cart with a cheap, flashing yellow light bar was parked sideways across the public sidewalk. 2 overweight men in ill-fitting navy blue security uniforms, the kind you buy online, were standing over my son. One of them was holding Leo's arm, his other hand holding a pair of shiny, toy-like handcuffs. My son, my gentle, bookish boy, looked pale and utterly terrified. And there, standing off to the side, clipboard in hand, was Carol Donaldson. Her face was a mask of triumph. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. This was her moment of ultimate victory, a public shaming and demonstration of her absolute power. I slammed the car into park in the middle of the street, not caring that I was blocking traffic, and got out. My stride was not that of a worried mother. It was the purposeful, implacable walk of a prosecutor heading to the witness stand for a kill shot. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice ringing out with an authority that made both of the fake cops flinch. Carol stepped forward, a smug smile plastered on her face. "Sarah, your son was found in violation of Community Ordinance 3B, prohibiting loitering in common areas. Our security team is handling it." "Your security team?" I shot back, my eyes locking onto the man holding my son. "Release him. Now." "Ma'am, we're official HOA security." The bigger one puffed out his chest. "Your son needs to come with us to the community clubhouse for processing." Processing for what? A non-existent crime. My voice was getting louder, sharper. "You are on a public sidewalk, not HOA property. You have no jurisdiction here. You are committing multiple felonies. Let go of my son." The crowd was murmuring now. My transformation from the quiet, compliant neighbor to this furious, articulate woman was clearly causing confusion. Carol laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You have no authority here. Sarah, you're just a resident, a problem resident. These men are authorized by the board. Your son is coming with them." She was basking in it. The power, the public humiliation. This was everything she'd wanted. This was the moment, the grand reveal. I took a deep breath. The tempo of the world seemed to slow down. I looked directly at the man holding the handcuffs. "My name," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm that carried across the entire street, "is Sarah Jensen. I am the acting district attorney for this county." Silence. Complete. Utter. Pin drop. Silence. The murmuring from the neighbors stopped. The fake cop's hand froze. Carol's smug smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes. "You," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the man holding Leo, "are committing unlawful restraint, a state jail felony. You," I pointed to the other one, "are a party to that crime. Both of you are in violation of Penal Code 37.11, impersonating a public servant, another felony." I turned my full attention to Carol. Her face was draining of all color. The triumphant smirk had been replaced by a slack-jawed horror. "And you, Carol," I said, my voice dripping with the ice of righteous fury. Are the ringleader. You are guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, a first-degree felony. You are guilty of coercion of a minor. You just threatened a child to intimidate a public official, me, which adds a whole other list of charges. I pulled out my phone. I am now calling 911. I am requesting every available patrol car and the on-duty watch commander. I am informing them that I have apprehended 3 individuals in the act of kidnapping a minor. I looked back at the 2 men. You have 2 seconds to release my son and put your hands on your heads before I add resisting arrest to the litany of charges that are about to end your sad little lives as free men. The man holding Leo dropped his arm as if it were on fire. The handcuffs clattered to the sidewalk. Both men, their faces ashen with terror, slowly raised their hands into the air. Leo rushed to me, and I wrapped my arm around him, never taking my eyes off Carol. She was frozen, a statue of pure shock. Her clipboard had fallen to the ground. Her perfect suburban kingdom, her entire world of petty rules and absolute power, had just been vaporized by a single, undeniable truth she had never, in her wildest fantasies, considered. The meek, rule-following woman she had terrorized for months wasn't just a lawyer. She was the lawyer, the top cop, the ultimate authority she had so desperately and pathetically tried to emulate. She had picked a fight with the one person in the entire county she should have been terrified of, and she had lost in the most public and catastrophic way imaginable. Her face was a perfect, beautiful portrait of dawning, abject horror. The wail of approaching sirens sliced through the stunned silence of Oakhaven. Within minutes, the street was flooded with the flashing red and blue lights of 3 squad cars and a supervisor's SUV. The neighbors, who had been watching the drama unfold with a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity, now looked on with wide-eyed shock. A uniformed police sergeant I knew well, a stocky, no-nonsense man named Miller, stepped out of the lead car. His eyes took in the scene, me, with my arm around a shaken Leo. 2 terrified men in ridiculous security outfits with their hands in the air, and Carol Donaldson, who looked like she might faint. D.A. Jensen, Sergeant Miller asked, his professional gaze sweeping the area. What's the situation? Sergeant, I replied, my voice steady and firm. These 3 individuals, I gestured to Carol and her 2 goons, conspired to unlawfully restrain and abduct my minor son. The 2 men, under her direction, were impersonating peace officers and attempting to take him into custody against his will. Miller's eyes hardened. He turned to his officers. Cuff all 3 of them. Carol let out a strangled gasp as an officer approached her, pulling out a pair of real, steel handcuffs. You can't do this, she shrieked, the first words she'd managed to utter since my reveal. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. Sergeant Miller gave a short, humorless laugh. Ma'am, right now you're a felony suspect. You have the right to remain silent. The legal and social fallout was immediate and absolute. Carol and her 2 security guards were arrested on the spot. I made sure to recuse myself officially from the prosecution to avoid a conflict of interest. But I handed the case over to my most tenacious deputy DA with a meticulously detailed file. The charges stuck conspiracy to commit kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and impersonating an officer. Carol's husband posted her bail, but she was facing serious prison time. The 2 men she hired quickly flipped on her, testifying that she had orchestrated the entire thing. Her reign was over. The Oakhaven Neighbors Facebook group exploded with the news. The story of the fake HOA cops and the secret DA mom became an instant local legend. The neighbors who had shunned me were now falling over themselves to apologize, bringing peace offerings of baked goods and casseroles. They spoke of living in fear of Carol's arbitrary fines and constant surveillance for years. It turned out my public stand was the catharsis the entire community needed. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Carol was stripped of her presidency in absentia, and a new board was elected, a board of reasonable people who, in their first official act, voted to rescind 2/3 of the ridiculous aesthetic bylaws. The resolution was more complete than I could have hoped for. Carol Donaldson, facing overwhelming evidence and public disgrace, took a plea deal that included significant probation, a permanent restraining order against my family, and mandated psychological counseling. Her husband sold their house at a loss, and they moved away in the dead of night. The fortress of solitude was finally secure. A few weeks later, on a warm evening, Leo and I were sitting on our front porch. The bland green shrubs were gone, replaced by a riot of vibrant, defiant, gloriously red knockout roses. And sitting proudly in the middle of them, his pointy hat gleaming in the setting sun, was the little garden gnome. A neighbor walked by with her dog and waved, a genuine, friendly smile on her face. "Love the roses, Sarah," she called out. I smiled back. "Thanks, me too." Leo leaned his head on my shoulder. Buster was asleep at our feet, snoring softly. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, blooming flowers, and peace. It was the quiet, normal life I had almost given up on. I had come to Oakhaven to escape conflict, but I had learned that true peace isn't about avoiding fights. It's about having the strength to fight the right ones.